Evening, my friends from Asian Oceania country, and also good morning, my friends from North America. My name is Nusharin Tanya Supercall, one of the AsiaSafe. So today we are proud to present one of the AsiaSafe webinar series that we are going to talking about enhancing optimization strategy in radiological practice lecture series. If you guys remember, last year we were talking about the DRL on what, where, when, why, and how. So this is like the second part of that lectures. After we know about the DRL, we are going to talk about how to optimization, how to get a good image quality, and how we can practice that things appropriately. So before we start further, first of all, I would like to introduce and get a welcoming speech from our president of the AOSR, Dr. Jamarichia Petrasopon, to give the opening speech on this lecture series. Welcome, Dr. Jamari.
Thank you, Dr. Nucharin. Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to open this important session, part of our 2025 webinar series focused on enhancing optimization strategies in radiological practice. This series, developed in collaboration with AsiaSafe and ISRRT, reflects our shared commitment to advancing safe, effective, and patient-centered radiology across our region. Today's topic, diagnostic reference levels revisited, is not just technical, it's foundational. DRL are a key part of how we ensure quality and safety in imaging, and revisiting them is essential as technologies evolve and clinical practices shift. We are privileged to have with us Associate Professor Samuel Brady, Chief Clinical Medical Physicist from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. His leadership in pediatric dose optimization and clinical implementation of DIL brings invaluable insight into this conversation. As we begin, I encourage all of us to think not only about how we apply these strategies in our own institutes, but also how we can lead change across borders through collaboration, education, and innovation. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamari, for your welcoming speech. So the next one, we're gonna have the welcoming video from our own chair of the AsiaSafe, Professor Inc., to give us a welcome speech and what we are going to do in this series.
Hi, I'm Professor Ng, the Chair of AsiaSafe. Welcome to this webinar series, Enhancing Optimization Strategies in Radiological Practice. And this is a series of 6 webinars. And to kick off this series, we have Associate Professor Dr. Brady, Samuel Brady, to speak on this topic of DRL Revisit. And we have the moderator for this session, Associate Professor Dr. Nucharin from AsiaSafe. Welcome once again.
Thank you so much, Professor Ng, for your welcome speech. So, first of all, I would like to share you guys the QR code on the evaluations and how do you think about this webinar series. And this gonna help us improve the quality of the webinar series and the topic that you want to learn. And then I also would like to introduce our speaker. So as Dr. Jamari and Professor Ng mentioned several times about Dr. Brady, who is he, right? That what we want to know, who is he and why he come and help us today. So let me share my screen now. So Dr. Brady, he is a good friend of mine that he was helping me in Thailand to help establishing the DRL in Thailand. He is a chief clinical medical physicist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and also the associate professor there. He also the fellows of the American Association of the Physicists in Medicine. He has his experience like a national. He helping with the IAEA to the international, helping Thailand for the establishing the DRL in the country. And he also the member of the IEC, which helped develop technical standards for the safe performance of the CT medical equipment around the world. And I think the incoming session for the IEC member is going to be in Thailand in September. And he also is like a very well known nationally as the committees and also is a vice chair of the Emergently Alliance, a chair of the ABR radiologist examination to development of the physics qualification core exam, and also chair for the AAPM annual meeting education program working group, and also the ad hoc committee for the AAPM on the AI artificial intelligence bootcamp. So please welcome Dr. Brady for his talk that he is going to tell you what is the DRL. I would say that we have heard this term many times, and also as a radiologist, sometimes you just, what is it? How can I get involved as a radiologist to understand that things, and how can I help to improve the quality of the images and also the optimization? So welcome, Dr. Brady.
Thank you. I appreciate that very, very kind welcome. I am excited to share with you about diagnostic reference levels. So it was about a year and almost a half ago that I had the opportunity to speak with the AOSR in collaboration with Dr. Canal, and we talked about diagnostic reference levels. So today I want to kind of revisit what DRLs are and how to establish them so that we can all start this webinar series from the same foundation, and we can build from here as we talk about quality optimization in all the modalities. So I have no conflicts of interest to share with you regarding my talk today, but I will be talking about various different companies, various different softwares that you are able to purchase or use in your hospital. I share them with you as an educational purpose only. I am not promoting any one of these products. So I just wanted to let you know, as you will hear some or see some names of companies throughout my talk. So I am very proud and grateful for the opportunity to be invited to speak in this webinar series. So obviously today we're going to be meeting and talking about DRLs. As we establish the foundation of what DRLs are, it will be exciting to then spend the rest of this webinar going in depth through each of the various different modalities and having an opportunity to learn strategies on how to better optimize these modalities. So in those presentations going forward, what I will be doing to present with you is sharing with you some of the new technologies, some of the stuff that's coming in the future so that we can prepare for what will happen soon, but focusing mostly on how to optimize those current technologies, what we have today in our hospitals and our imaging clinics, with the focus on improving optimization for radiation dose in image quality. I intend to give practical tips on how to optimize each of these modalities so that people with advanced technology or people that are working with resource limited departments can both gain knowledge on how to optimize their imaging equipment for their patients. So let's begin. My educational goals for today is I will spend a few slides talking about and reminding us what diagnostic reference levels are. And then I'm going to talk about where we can find DRLs, how we can either find them that are already published and use them in our clinics, or how we can establish a process to build our own national DRLs in your respective country. And then throughout my talk, I'm going to share some examples of my experience, but mostly this third bullet point will be used as the next couple of webinars come when we talk about each of the modalities. We'll go into a lot more detail. So today, I intend to just simply share a few examples. So, what is a DRL? DRLs are used to help us understand and avoid delivering excess radiation to our patients, because we don't need a certain level of radiation for our clinical tasks. So the question is, well, how do we know what that level is? What is the level by which we cross and we get too much radiation that doesn't help diagnostically? Well, that's what a DRL is. What we do is we're going to collect all of this information from you locally and from all of your neighboring hospitals and clinics all around the nation and even internationally. And we're going to bring all this data together and we're going to look at how your peers image. And so if you're thinking about, say, a brain CT, what is the typical dose that most people use for an adult or a pediatric brain CT? And that will become the level that we consider medically necessary. And so that is what the DRL is. It helps us understand what that level is that all of your peers are using. So the DRLs have been around for a very long time, but more recently, the international body, the ICRP, published this report, ICRP 135. And in this report, they define what a DRL is, and they give examples and share with you how to set up a DRL. This report was published in 2017, and most of what my talk focuses on, my various slides, come from the ICRP report 135. But if you want to learn more and get more in depth with building and understanding DRLs, I highly recommend downloading this reference. From my understanding, it's free to download. Anyone can just Google and look for ICRP report 135. So let's start by first defining what DRLs do not do or provide for us. They are not a level that or a limit to how we image patients or specific examinations. What they're meant to do is give us a context for understanding the patient dose that was provided, to help identify trends in our dosing. And so if we find maybe we have 5 CT scanners in a couple of different hospitals, what if one of those is a little higher than the other 4? Well, that helps us understand that trend. And then we can learn and we can focus on doing something called a root cause analysis and go to that one system in that one hospital and figure out, why is that one higher than the rest? It's simply there to help us identify outliers. It's not meant to be a penalty. And so that's why we never apply it to an individual patient. If an individual patient gets a dose higher than the DRL, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as the patient needed that radiation dose for the diagnostic task. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. When you look at ICRP 135, it defines 3 terms: DRL quantity, DRL value, and DRL process. So I'm going to now spend the next few slides going through each of these terminologies individually. So first of all, what is DRL quantity? A DRL quantity is something that is measurable. It is a common value that you find on your imaging modality. So as an example, in fluoroscopy or in planar radiography, you guys will have no doubt seen the term air kerma or air kerma area product, sometimes called CAP or DAP. These are values that are usually reported with every examination when we perform fluoroscopy and X-ray. In mammography, we see air kerma also, but we also oftentimes use the term mean glandular dose. And then for CT, of course, there's the volume CTDI, the dose length product, and the size-specific dose estimate, or SSDE. Each of these quantities are measurable, something that I can actually take my ion chamber and go into the room, and I can measure the amount of radiation coming out of the machine, and do a couple quick calculations. And each of these quantities are common across all modalities. So for example, a CT to be a term, to be quantity to be used in CT needs to be something that each machine offers. So volume CTDI is something that you find on all CT scanners. And that is why we can use that for DRLs. One term that we often use in radiology is the effective dose. This value we do not use for diagnostic reference levels because, first of all, we cannot measure it. But second of all, it doesn't actually reference anything with respect to patients. It is based on calculations we make regarding using these type of computational phantoms, these mathematical phantoms. They're very helpful for us to understand population dose values, but the problem is they're averaged among the genders. So each of these phantoms, they actually both contain male and female sex organs, so that when we calculate the effective dose for the population, it's not specific to any one gender, it's averaged for them both. And then finally, the reason we do not use effective dose for setting up DRLs is that they change over time. To calculate the effective dose value, you have to multiply the radiation output by a tissue weighting factor shown over here. These tissue weighting factors change over time. And so therefore, because it's not measurable and it's changing, we do not use effective dose with time. Excuse me, for DRLs. All right, the next term, so that was DRL quantity. So now DRL values. DRL values are collected at your local institution, and then they are sent to a national repository, a national collection agency, that they will be able to collect your information, your data, and all of your peer data so that they can come up with and calculate DRLs. They take this data and then they will sort it by examination type. So they'll separate, say, head CTs from chest CTs. They'll separate it based on equipment. Some people will have 64 slice CT scanners. Others may have 320 slice CT scanners, which have different outputs. And then we will divide up the data based on patient demographics, such as patient weight, age, or size. When we collect this data, it's important to understand how to share the data to the national group. We share from our local institution median dose values. So you may ask yourself, why median dose? Why not average? Well, there are three ways to calculate an average that we typically see in the scientific literature: mode, median, and mean. So let me show this example of two scanners with two pretend dose distributions, one solid purple, one dash. And so if we were to compare the mode average of these two distributions, shown here in red, you can see that the mode distribution for scanner 2 is different. The most frequent dose value for these two distributions is different based on the shape of their distribution. Similar, if we look at the mean of these distributions, this blue value right here, the mean, which is the overall average of everything in that distribution, they are different, largely because scanner 2 has this really strong rightward skew. But the median value is calculated by taking all of the doses and putting them in order from lowest to highest and picking the one in the middle. And that you can see here, of these two pretend distributions, the green distribution the median distribution from scanner 2 and scanner 1 are identical. Medians are not affected by extreme values in your distribution. So if you have very low dose values and very high dose values, they don't skew or shift that value. And that is why we use the median dose value when we are calculating DRLs. Once we send all the data to the national repository, they will collect all of your data plus everyone else's data, and then they will find the point where 75% of all that data is collected. All of that data is under 75%. And this is where we define the DRL at the 75th percentile, which is to say that if a dose value falls under the 75th percentile, it is equal to or less dose than all of the other in this distribution. So DRL is defined for 75%, the 75 percentile. And this helps us understand then where to focus our optimization task. Values that are greater than, so doses that are higher than 75% in the dose population, these are values that we are going to now ask ourselves, are they necessary? Do we need this high a dose? And if so, that's okay. And if not, maybe we can lower them. There is a second term that the ICRP 35 report shares with us. It's called the achievable dose. The achievable dose is defined at the 50th percentile. So using the same distribution of data, it now just finds the 50th percentile or the median value. And now this, what it offers is an optional benchmark for us to do quality control. So when you look at the values and what happens if your department, your local scanner is lower than the 75th percentile. Let's say you're right here in this cohort. That's great. You may be happy and satisfied with that image quality and that dose level. But what the achievable dose benchmark offers you is an option to say, well, 50% of my peers actually use less radiation than me. And so possibly I can ask myself, if this image quality is still overly is more than I need, maybe I can lower below the achievable dose or the 50th percentile. So DRLs come in two flavors. One is a 75th percentile, which is what we are all aiming to be at or below. And then we have the optional opportunity to further optimize below the 50th percentile. And then finally, the DRL process, which is very straightforward. It's this idea that once we've established DRLs, we are not finished. We've only just begun the process. Once your facility submits this information, the national organization establishes the DRLs for your country. They will then share those DRLs back to you. You will then compare your local data compared to all of your peer institutions, and then you will have the opportunity to perform quality control. And if everything goes well and you start to lower your doses, now you're going to submit data back to the national institution, and it's going to be lower. And so will all of your peers. And so starts a cyclical process of constantly looking at what is the most appropriate dose for a particular examination. I give you an example from the United Kingdom, who they have been performing or using DRLs for a very long time. They're probably one of the first countries in the world that instituted this idea of collecting national dose data and tracking and using it for quality control. All the way back in the 1980s, they started this process. And they found after they did this cyclical process, they were able to reduce national doses by 50%. But then as the cycle kept spinning and spinning, they realized a little over 15 years later, they had still brought the dose down even 20% more. And so we see this process as an opportunity to slowly but consistently hone in and identify what really is diagnostically necessary for our imaging tasks. So that was a quick review of what DRLs are. Now, where do I find them? How do I establish them? So first, I want to start with the very simple way to get a DRL is just to go onto the website, onto the internet, and download them. There are multiple published values of DRLs all over the world. Here in the United States of America, we have report NCRP 172 published in 2012. In that report, it provided CT, X-ray, fluoro, and dental values for national DRLs. We have a private group called the ACR. They're not a national organization. They're not a national government, but they are a national institution. And all hospitals can voluntarily share their information to the ACR. They take that data and then they also collect and create DRLs. And so they have DRLs for CT, and they have some forthcoming for fluoroscopy. After 2012, in 2016, there was another report from the NCRP, Report 184, where they then updated the doses for all imaging modalities. Here I give you just an example, and I will be sharing my slides with the AOSR, so you don't have to take pictures or collect this. All of this will be for you as you download this, download these slides. But here are some examples of those ACR CT DRLs, publications for both adults and pediatrics. Here's that report 172 and 184, all of which are downloadable. I believe the NCRP reports cost money to download, but the ACR reports, these two in the middle, they are free to download. In Europe, they have been using DRLs, as I've mentioned, for a very long time. In fact, about 72% of all the countries in the European Union have DRLs for adult X-ray, and only about 40-ish% have them for pediatric X-ray. 64% for adult nuclear medicine, and pretty much all of the countries, all 23 European Union countries have DRLs set up for CT. Here, once again, is just a list of published values. So if you want to know what a typical DRL is for head CT or a common 2-view chest radiograph, these are some examples that you can go in and find online. Pretty much all of these are also free to download. These are publications that are in journals, many of which are 10 some years old, so they're easy to download. Not easy, they're free to download. And now shifting to your side of the world. Among the Asian countries, there is a very strong push to get all of the countries to establish DRLs. In fact, there has been an Asiatic Radiological Summit that's been now conducted for six consecutive times, in which 13 delegates from all of your countries, that they come together and they talk about how to develop DRLs, lessons learned in each of your respective countries, so that everyone can kind of learn and we can all rise together. More recently, last year in 2024, during the Japanese the Japanese Radiological Society's annual meeting, forgive me, I forgot how to speak. They conducted the 6th annual summit on Asian radiological safety. And in that summit, they wrote this document that was just recently published a couple of months ago in this year, in which each of the various 13 countries describe where they are and how they are coming along. So this is a freely downloadable publication, and it gives you the ability to kind of see where your country and other countries are with respect to DRLs. In fact, our own emeritus president of the AOSR, Professor Ng, discussed as the keynote speaker radiation optimization and protection at that summit. So once again, these are just some examples of your countries and the various different DRLs published with respect to CT, fluoroscopy. Here from Thailand is nuclear medicine. All across your area, your region, there are lots of DRLs that have been established for both adults and pediatrics among most of the imaging modalities. So the option here is you can just simply find the DRLs online and you can apply them for your country and at your institution. But if you want to establish something that's more generalized for your specific population, for your specific country, you need to establish a national dose index registry, or something called an NDIR. And this is where you take all of the data from your local organizations, your local hospitals, and send that to your national institution, where they will then perform the calculation specific for your population, for your country. So I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to establish an NDIR. Obviously, for an NDIR, they're going to collect this radiation data. They're going to be that repository then that provides the statistical calculations to separate out, as I said, the exam type, machine type, patient demographics, and they develop the national DRLs. They then produce a reporting mechanism so that those DRLs can be distributed back to all of the imaging hospitals throughout your country. There's a great publication in Physica Medica that came out in 2021. It's down, the citation's down here on the left. And in this publication, the authors actually give a really simple kind of 5-step process on how to build an NDIR. And so I am simply going to kind of reference that publication in the following slides. So the first is, once you've established a national organization or entity to own this process, they then need to make a call for participation. So they need to invite all of the imaging hospitals or clinics throughout the nation to participate. Now, when you do this, it's very helpful to actually, instead of just do it blanket across all the country, but it's helpful to actually break the country up into sections or zones. If your country is anything like mine, there are regional populations that are unique compared to others. And so, for example, in the United States of America, the southern population is typically physically different than the northern, and the same is different from east to west. And so when we set up our national DIR or NDIR, they broke it up into these different color-coded zones. And so I'm over here in Ohio. I'm this little black dot right here. And Tanya's this little black dot right here. And so when we share our data, we can actually compare our pediatric hospitals because we're in that same zone. Now, we can also share our data we can compare our data to everywhere, but we just know that her patient population and mine are fairly similar, and so that our doses should be fairly similar. So you want to invite people from regions and globally throughout your nation, and you want to make sure you get a sampling of the different types of imaging centers. You don't want all academic hospitals, but you want a mix of academic, community-based, and even specialty. Some will be cardiology only, some will be musculoskeletal or orthopedic. You need to collect that data too. So don't think just the big hospitals. Try to invite everyone, because that will give you a sampling of all the type of imaging that occurs in your nation. Now that you have called for participation, you need to identify your national NDIR. They need to identify common examinations that they're going to collect. Now, on my CT scanner, I have something like 220 exams. We don't need to collect all 220 exams to set up for DRLs. More likely, what we're going to do is we're going to give priority to the exams that are performed the most often, like common head exams, common chest CT, abdomen, pelvis. Those are the protocols that most people are exposed to when they go in for imaging. And it's a lot easier to calculate DRLs for 10 exams versus 200 exams. When we pick these common exams, we also need to make sure we identify the specific quantity that we're going to collect. So, for example, mammography will probably collect mean glandular dose, and CT will probably collect volume CTDI, DLP, or SSDE. But that's part of the invitation to participate. They identify the, say, 10 most common exams, and they identify which quantity they want to collect. Of course, they remind everyone we need your median dose value, that median quantity. We don't want mean, we don't want mode, we want median. So once they have started to collect that data, of course, they're going to sort that data as we discussed. But how many exams do we share from our local institution? The ICRP 135 report recommends a minimum, so you can send more, but a minimum of 50 patients for mammography and somewhere between 20 to 30 patients or exams per fluoro, X-ray, CT, and your nukes. Once that's all collected, then the NDIR can aggregate and perform statistics. So how do we get the data to the NDIR? Well, the easiest way is to use dose management software. These are software companies that generally reside or live at your hospital. So every CT scan that's performed, they send a dose report to that software. And so for you, you can look at, oh, this is how much radiation I'm using for all of these protocols. But then in turn, you can say, I want these 10 reports to go, sets of data to go up to the National Dose Index Registry. So it's very easy if it's electronic, but not everyone has that option, and you can use paper-based surveys. As an example, there was a publication, here's the citation down here, in 2022, came from Senegal, and they demonstrated how they performed or collected data for established in national DRLs using paper. Once again, they sent out a questionnaire, an invitation to participate, where they identified which protocols and quantities to collect. Importantly, they added this step, and I love that they did this, is they said, before you send us the data, check the data. Make sure it's good. Make sure that that protocol you're sending to us was optimized. We don't want to get really bad data, super high doses or super low doses, because then that skews the national value. So take a moment, look at the data, make sure, is this reasonable? And then you can send it on. And then, of course, all the other steps are the steps that we just talked about. And of course, then they parsed out the data, separated it once again by equipment type, patient demographics, procedure type, and examined. And they collected various different parameters like the machine output, KV, mass, film size, the focus to film distance, or SID. So they did all this so that they could calculate the DRLs. In some instances, the machine itself may be old enough that it doesn't actually display air kerma for X-ray or CAP. That's okay. If you still want to participate, you can have someone like me or someone in your institution that can go in and measure what that air kerma value is for those procedures, and then they can share that. So if your machine doesn't specifically output the value, a medical physicist or someone that is competent, like a technologist, to make those measurements can make those and send those on to the National Dose Index Registry. Here are just two examples. When I was online, I found a document from Korea and one from the United Kingdom. It's going to collect all the information. It's going to collect all the basic information from the machine type and all the equipment type. And then it's very specific about, as you can, well, if you speak Korean, which I do not, but Google Translate very much helped me understand what all of this meant. But you can then, it collects all of the different parameters and all the information. This is a simple document that was then sent off electronically. You could, if you wanted to, digitize these documents, and so they could fill them out on the web. So there's not a physical paper, but the concept is still the same. All right, so if you do have dose management software, the DMS, this actually facilitates the flow of data a little bit. There are a lot of different options, but I want to start with the free version. There is a company called OpenREM. You can see the website right here. You can go on, and this software, you can, as of last night, I checked, you can download it, and it will allow you to collect data from your CT scanners, X-ray, fluoroscopy, and mammography systems. It does all of this typical processing, gives you graphs, gives you plots. It helps you to know what your dose values are for your patients, but it also helps you so that you can send your data to the NDIR. There are a lot of different versions that you can pay for. Once again, they all have their pros and cons, and so that's a decision that you would have to make for your institution. You need to just make sure that whichever software option you pick is able to collect and transmit those dose metrics that are needed for your DRLs. This is a presentation given by a great colleague of mine, Dr. Sarah McKinney. It is still, I checked the link yesterday. You can go to this link and you can watch this talk from the IAEA. And Dr. McKinney spends about an hour going through all the pros and cons of how to pick a dose management software, DMS. So I highly recommend it if you have the time. But just understand, I stole one slide from her talk where she talks about how pretty much all of these softwares will collect data for CT, but most will do fluoro and X-ray, but not all. And definitely nuclear medicine's a little lower. So When you do choose whichever software, you need to make sure it's going to collect the proper amount of data so you can participate in the DRLs. On top of that, at least as of 2021, only 67% of these softwares can actually submit or send data out. All of them can collect data, and it's used locally at your hospital, but only about 70% can then push it to a third entity, your NDIR. So make sure you have the right software to participate. All right, at the national level, you need to set up servers. So you'll have a DMS software to collect this data. These two softwares do not have to be the same. You can have vendor A on the national level and vendor B or C or D at the local level. That's okay, as long as they can communicate. That's fine. You do not have to have the same software platform throughout your nation. All right, after you've established the way to push the data back and forth, you need to send the same thing. If we say this is an apple, you have to agree that it's an apple. And that is probably the hardest thing. When I say this is a head CT, your naming convention at your hospital may be different. And so we need to talk a little bit about how to speak the same language when it comes to naming the procedure. There are different ways to do this. There is a company called SNOMED CT. You can go onto their website and they provide for you the opportunity to match. So you have a CT head trauma, and they will tell you how to name it so that the national DRL will understand that that's a CT head trauma. To use SNOMED CT, it does cost money, but it's used in over 80 countries, which means it's most likely that your country data is involved in it, so it knows how to understand what you use for your national billing, CPT codes, etc. A free version is something that comes from the RSNA here in the US. It's called the RADLEX. They actually just a couple years ago, they merged with the other free version, which was LOINC. And so now it's the LOINC RADLEX playbook. But it's the same concept where you can go to their website, just Google RADLEX, you'll find their website, easy. And in that, you will find a long list of all the modalities and exam types broken up by body part, and each of them are given a ID, a RADLEX Playbook ID, or RPID. And so you can use that then to associate what at the national level with your local information. So this is an example for my general fluoroscopy studies. On the left is these RADLEX RPID values. So here, RADLEX RPID 6820 is for fluoroscopic feed tube placement. So then I can pull up on my scanner, my software. I can look at all my different fluoroscopy scanners. I can look at, how many studies they're all performed on each of those. And then I can then pick, okay, how about NG tube or NJ tube placement? And then I can say, I want that associated with my feed tube place 6820. By simply basically marrying these two topics together, every time my data goes up to the national NDIR, they receive the data labeled 6820, but it's every one of these procedures that are performed in my hospital. So it's just a way of taking all of the various different ways we name things on each different unit, different scanner, and giving it one name. Now, that's good for pretty much all of them, but there are some modalities that are very difficult to marry. In the IR and using the fluoroscopic guided interventional softwares or systems, oftentimes we'll find that the RPID values don't really have a direct correlation with what we name the procedure. The procedures tend to be way more descriptive when we're doing interventional radiological procedures than what they are listed in the RPID. In which case, we got together at our local hospital and we grouped them together. We had to say, okay, these groups of these procedures right here, based on their dose level, should be grouped with this RPID. And these ones with these dose levels at a different level. And so sometimes you do kind of have to associate. You have to make a very good, educated guess as to how to set up the data. Now, it's not wrong. We're just doing our best. And then when it all goes up, hopefully they will see statistically that it all matches up. All right, so the central repository does prefer electronic transmitting electronic data, but it can receive the papers. And before they set up a DRL, they need to receive data from at least 20 to 30 facilities so that they have a good sampling across your population. Eventually, the goal is to get 30 to 50% of all imaging facilities in your country. Now, when you take that data at the national level, you need to make sure you stratify it by patient demographic. And this is one example. Here on my left are my head CT. This is all the head CTs performed at my hospital for a given, I think, half a year. I can't remember the time frame. Now, we're a pediatric hospital. And so when you look at the data, here's our national DRL. Here's our patient population 75th and 50th percentile. So you can see there are some studies that do exceed the DRL. When I break it down by exam type, now it's broken down by age because we are pediatrics, so we have different dosing levels for different size heads and age heads. And you can see that the only procedures that exceed the DRL are from our patient group over 6 years old. And so if I apply DRLs globally to all my protocols, I actually am not in any way optimizing my 0 to 6 year old. They're all much lower. So at the national level, this is my plea as a pediatric imaging physicist. Make sure you set up DRLs for both adults and pediatrics. If you only set it up for adults, you will not be able to optimize kids, the dose levels for kids. So please make sure you consider the fact that there are going to be lower doses in head CTs, but some of those actually may be too high. All right, so we sort, we aggregate, we've already talked about this, we review for outliers. I've told you that locally you're sending about 20 to 30 procedures from each of these exam types, 20 to 30 head CTs, 20 to 30 chest CTs, etc. In total, at the national level, they really can't start calculating DRLs until they have about 1,000 studies. So your 20 and 30 may feel like a small amount, but when we get a lot of that data from a lot of different sources, it adds up quickly. And so once we get about 400 to 1,000 exam type, procedures per exam type, then we can calculate the DRL. Finally, and the most important step is to take this data and share it back to the local institution. So once the national institution has calculated the DRL, they share it. You take that DRL and you apply it to your patient population, and then you look at the doses that may be a little higher and start this cyclical process of asking yourself, is the dose too high? Is it properly optimized? What should we do? So we've talked about these 3 steps. I've pretty much given you a lot of examples throughout, but this is one example I shared just a couple slides ago with our head CT data. So we established on the national level, they gave us 3 DRLs based on 0 to 2, 2 to 6, and over 6 years old. And we set up 2 notification levels in our quality control procedure. One is the achievable dose, that's level 1. And so all procedures that exceed the 50th percentile will get an email saying, hey, this head CT was a little higher than the 50th percentile. And then level 2 is if it exceeds the 75th percentile or the DRL, then we also have that. And so we look at both data that exceed the 75th percentile, of course. We want to make sure that scanner is not over the national DRL. But we're also looking at that little group in between 50th and 75th percentile, trying to decide for ourselves, should we move the dose lower or maybe even higher? And so setting up and knowing what the 50th and 75th percentile is nationally, we're able to then kind of play with and optimize our data. So in summary, we've talked a little about DRLs, what DRLs are. They're great for establishing a threshold, so we kind of know where most of our peers are imaging. Anything over the 75th percentile is an invitation for us to optimize. Anything below 75th percentile is good. We should ask ourselves, is the image quality appropriate? And if it's appropriate, we can be okay with that. If not, we can maybe bring it down to the 50th percentile. We should never, once again, use these DRLs as a punitive quantity to say, oh, this patient exam got too high a dose. That's not the case. It's not applied specifically to an individual, but more specifically to like a exam type or a machine. We talked about how using DMSs can be used to set up national DRLs. We gave several examples. I gave several examples of different types, but the important part is to collect, sort, and then provide the proper statistical analysis so we can understand at the local level what is the DRL. And then once this is all established, the final plea and reminder is this is a cyclical process. Every about 3 to 5 years is what ICRP 135 recommends, that we revisit and reestablish DRLs. We shouldn't be satisfied with, once we have a DRL, to stay with it forever, but realize that over time, they will come down as technology and optimization occur. So I appreciate your time listening. As I said before, these slides are yours to review. And if you ever have any questions, my information is down here. I'm always happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for the excellent lectures and recap on the DRL. Give us the a clear information on what we need to know about the DRL, how to establish the DRL, and how to use it. So in the meantime, for the people who watch on the VDoctor platform, if you have any question, you need to log in to the platform to start the chat conversation. So that way you can put your questions online and we can see it. And in the meantime, I have a questions for you, Sam,
Yeah.
as always. So I mean, we were talking about this thing multiple times, that you are talking on the medical physicist standpoint, right? This is a very important, but we know that when we work on this project, we need a several party, including a radiologist and also the technologist, which mean in US it's maybe easier since you have a medical physicist almost every hospital, right? But in terms of the country that did not have the luxury to have a lot of medical physicists, and when you come to talk to the radiologist, it's what are you talking about? What do you want me to do? And how can I help to this with this process? And also the technologists, what is your suggestion? How can we how can you include those people? How can we implement this thing for the radiologists and technologists to help?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. The reality is it's a teamwork. It's a team that provides this. I think the most important aspect, first of all, most hospitals, most radiology departments will have an optimization team. So they're going to find maybe a champion, 1 or 2 radiologists, or maybe if there's more, they have radiologists per body part. But we can need at least 1 or 2 radiologists. And then we're going to identify usually 1 or 2 technologists. If you have the luxury of having a medical physicist, that's awesome at your institution. More likely, you either have one that is a regional physicist that kind of travels. And if you don't even have a physicist, that's okay. Call me. I'd love to come visit. But
Yeah.
the radiologist team with a technologist and potentially a physicist, they can start that process of optimization. You need a radiologist. They're the ones that look at the images. If the images are too noisy, if they're exceptionally good, they can give the feedback for what they need to see for their diagnostic task. Technologists are the ones, of course, that actually scan the patient. They are intimately familiar with the technology. They understand the quantities coming off it. They understand the parameters that they've probably built. And so they can go to the radiologist and say, is this good enough? And they can say, I could use more, or this is good enough. And they would be able to then work on a process to kind of slowly step it down. If they need to reduce the dose, they can do it a little by little until the radiologist is comfortable with what they see. Ultimately, it is a team effort. And so it's very important that every institution or department gives the opportunity for a team to be formed. And then they do need to provide time. That's hard, but the committee needs to be able to meet maybe once a month. So they need to have a day to do their job or more. And so that is a commitment from the institution or the department to let these people do something non-clinical, but to actually set up these and provide that quality control.
I see. Thank you. We also have Dr. Jamari here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brady, for your talks. Very easy to understand. uh, I would like to ask about the definition of the terminology that you have mentioned, that it need to be the same, right? Because when you said CT head or CT brain, okay,
Yeah.
and then you have mentioned about the SNOMED CT and also the LOIS. Usually this part, radiologists or radiological technologists will not involve it. Mainly, what I have seen is in the medical informatics part, or the one who work with the data, how we incorporate that into the work of the radiologists and the technologists. If the country didn't have a kind of medical informatics personnel or the strength on this. Actually, Thailand has no MedCT. We lucky that few years ago the country decided to pay the national license. So right now a lot of work has been done on clinical side. I mean, all the doctors try to use the SNOMED CT in the electronic medical record, which is quite a challenge because we get used all the ICD-10, ICD-10 Thai modification, but right now add another SNOMED CT. But I don't think radiologists or the technologies on our curriculum of training has that much involved in clinical nomenclature of the laws and everything that is the back end, which no one said on CPOE or everything like that. How you think the developing country will deal with that part?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's reality, right? Not everyone's going to pay for SNOMED. You could, if you have the opportunity, download the Radlex, which is free. But even then, a very simple step would be to define the description. So head CT, brain CT, is it a cephalogram? Are we looking at trauma, bleed, stroke? Why we perform the scan is usually very important, and that's well understood, right? And so if we can then start by saying, why is this performed? We can say, oh, this is a group. And that hospital or that national group, that government, can then define, okay, we're looking for head CT non-trauma or head CT trauma. And then the individuals at their local institution will look at how they've named that protocol. And they can say, okay, this protocol matches close enough with that description. That is how that's the data we're going to send. And so it doesn't have to be SNOMED. It doesn't necessarily have to be Radlex. Those are just options that maybe make your life a little easier. But the end is matching description. Why is it performed? And which protocol on your scanner is selected for that type?
Thank you. Make sure you speak the same language, right?
And that's why the team is great. It's like you said,
Yeah.
you have the radiologist, the technologist, and then there is the person in the middle that is the IT specialist, the PAC specialist. They're ones that collect all that data, and they're the ones that oftentimes make that communication, that they bridge that communication from what the radiologist orders to what the technologist picks on the scanner. And so they are actually a great person. That is a great recommendation on your part. Make sure they're part of the team.
Thank you.
Hey Sam, this is a question. Since you are the chair of the ABR exam on the medical physics for radiologists, what do you think on how to implement this concept to the young generation, for the incoming radiologists? Does it help? Do you implement this thing during those exam, or do they supposed to know this thing? Because I feel like it's very challenging when you become a radiologist. You are in practice. Somehow the workload that you have bombarding you, and you don't even have a chance to think about this thing. I can speak for myself that I just learned I know the DRL, but I have no idea about DRL before until I start working in this a pediatric radiology field and working with you, so I understand this thing better. But in your opinion, yeah.
It's hard and getting harder. Yes, you're
Okay.
busier, but we also have new technology. For those of you that are lucky to have auto dictation, you have AI dictation now, where the system will take the dose report and will automatically concate it to your report, and you will never see it as a radiologist. Now, obviously, you're supposed to review your report before you sign it, but oftentimes this dose data is just put in there and you don't think twice about it. You just assume someone else has made sure it's appropriate. And so I think that's a great question, because for trainees, they need to be forced to think about that data. There will come a time later in their careers where they just will take it for granted. But at the very beginning, they should be required to look at those dose reports. They need to be given the idea, these are common dose values for your population in your country. And then hopefully they can compare that nationally or globally. But being able to identify what they are, so education as to what a CTDI value is, what does that mean? And then as they get comfortable through their training and then eventually into their career, they'll start to see these numbers, and just slowly but surely they'll start collecting an average in their head, and they'll know what is good and bad. So I agree, completely agree. There needs to be training. It needs to be part of their process. Yes, they have to learn to read a CT head or a chest exam, but they should also then have that context of, oh, this was 10 milligram. Was that good or bad? And that will come with training. And so I just hope that it is part of the training process. I know we have so much to learn, but it is something that it's critical, especially there's more and more reports come out where they talk about dose levels being too high, causing future cancers. But what is all of this? We need to be able to contextualize the output of our machine compared to everything else we see, because our patients will come to us and they're going to be concerned. I just got a head CT. Now they're scared that they're going to get cancer. But if you've been trained on what dose levels are, what your national DRLs are, you can say, oh, our values are 20, 30% lower than the nation. And that's actually very good for business, because you can help reassure your patients that everything will be okay.
Yes.
I think our not radiology but clinical community need to be more transparency in terms of what can we do harm to the patients. You know what I mean? Because usually we try not to talk about what do we do harm, because patients will ask more, right?
Mhm.
So we didn't talk about, okay, you may get too much radiation. I don't think any of our radiologists or our technologists will explain in terms of CT brain to the patients, but the incident happens, right? I remember a few years ago, the incident of overdose of the CT brain happened. So, but that kind of incident is something that we put under the ground and try not to discuss those to the patients. So I think the education, knowledge sharing, and also make sure that ethically we tell the good and the bad for what we do, and we try to do the good, right? I think that also the part that we should. That's why I think many countries start to have kind of a recommendation to put the dose at least on the report, or the patients who got the kind of a chronic disease, who will have many studies now and in the future, should know what they are having. I think that part also, I agree that it needs to be in the curriculum, even after they done with the residence training and cannot remember, but at least we train our people to be able to be transparency and safety first on many parts.
Yeah, we here in the United States, most of our regional states, they require the dose to be reported. Like I said, sometimes it's just automatically added, so we don't think about it, but it's required to be reported. And two, as was mentioned by the previous question, the ABR, our boarding agency, it's part of the curriculum that, a certain percentage of that test, for the board certifying test, will ask questions about dose. What is a typical head CT? What is an appropriate dose for X-ray, et cetera? And so I think that's important on your regional boarding agencies and education, and then to work with your national governments, requiring dose reporting helps not just your hospital or the big academic hospitals to conform, but it helps bring everyone together so that everyone in your country is getting the same quality of imaging.
Yeah, and I think it's not only like a radiologist in training, but it's also the technologists in training that need to know the
Yes.
concept, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Hey, we got one question
Mhm.
from the audience on the VDoctor platform. I think this person really interested into like a establish the DRL in
Mhm.
like their own hospital. But the question is
Mhm.
it possible for just a single hospital to establish their own DRL if the national DRL has not yet been established in the country? How
So the
what can
answer is, yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead. Yeah, it's like what can they do? Like they want to do it, but like the national level have not set up
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. So by definition, no, your one hospital cannot set up a DRL. DRLs are meant to be national. Now, there's something you can do. You can establish what your levels are. So you look at your data and you can find your 50th and your 75th percentile. And then when a scanner or an exam type exceeds that 75th percentile, you can perform the quality control you need to make sure your patients are getting the appropriate dose. That is good medicine. It's not national, but it's good medicine. Two, you can work with the region. Now, your hospital may actually have branches throughout the region. And so you can then make sure to roll that process out to more than just you, but your neighbors. Now, once you have, say, a couple of neighbors working together, now you can start talking national DRLs. They're still not national because there's only a few of you, but you can start to do it. Eventually, if you can get friends from across the country and you get 4, 5, or 6, maybe 10 larger institutions, now you can start building DRLs. And you may create them yourself, but at some point, it's good that the government takes it, but maybe they never do. Like I said, here in the US, a private entity, the ACR, actually does most of ours. And so we all of our institutions just came together and said, we're willing to give to the ACR this data. They're willing to give us back the reports.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't have to be the national government. Governments can be very slow at times. Ours is very, very slow. But you can, if you really feel passionate about this, you can start at your level and branch out. And eventually your enthusiasm hopefully will bring everyone together.
So
How,
that considered as a
sorry.
local DRL. The hospital is like a local DRL, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if the hospital has more than one equipment, for example, they have 3 CT scan, right, in different department, emergency department and radiology imaging department, can we use that different equipment and start to establish their own reference level between 2 equipment?
If the equipment is somewhat similar, if you have a 16 slice scanner and a 32 slice scanner, the outputs are probably, so no, you can't compare those. And also trauma patients will probably largely be scanned on the ED, and then inpatient diagnostic, cancer surveillance type patients will be scanned in the radiology department. In which case those dosing mechanisms are probably different. We're okay exposing a little higher for trauma. When we do a surveillance head scan for cancer follow-up 10 times a year, we're going to keep that dose a little lower. So it's not quite appropriate to compare those two. And that's why we always go back to the description. Now, if your radiology department is a backup trauma scanner, great. Now you have trauma patients on both scanners. You can compare those two. That would be appropriate.
Thank you so much, Sam. So I would say that for that one, I remember when Thailand was trying to establish the DRL, is like from the group of the pediatric radiologists who work in like a Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Songkran Nakarin, like a group together. And okay, we're gonna start collect the data by ourselves for our pediatric patient. It's so painful. It's like a paper. It's a paper written things, and we collect those things and we share. But at least we have like a multiple hospital from the group of the people who interested in the same thing, trying to do that thing. But it is a long process. I would say it's like more than 10 years before we are able to push that thing and go to the national level.
Yeah, and I would say if you're a single institution, but you want to know, is your dose too high or low, use the publications online. If you're in, I don't know where you are, let's say you're in Singapore, you can look at Thailand's data. Yes, they're two different populations, but they're close. So you can at least say, oh, in Thailand, they have this level. And then in Korea, they have this level. In Japan, they have this level. And it starts to help you just start to go, oh, yeah, we're a little higher than Japan, a little lower than Korea, etc. And that gives you a way to start to understand the context of your doses. So yes, you may be the only fish in your big pond, but it's okay. Use what's out there. You can use Europe, you can use US, you can use other Asian countries. And that's just a way to help start from someplace.
Yes. So I think that is the only questions from the online. And thank you so much again. Thank you so much again for giving like the wrap up, the revisiting on the DRL before we move on to the next session. As you mentioned that we're gonna have like a multiple series like until November to talking about like each modality, and like during that time we're gonna have you as the main speaker and we're gonna have the local expert in this region to share the experience and we can discuss. We're gonna have more discussion, I do believe. Like okay, this is what you suggest, like the new technology and like what we are doing here in this region, which is gonna be the good learning opportunity for both of us. So there is a couple things. So the people who like watch this thing online, we put the evaluation form and we're gonna show the QR code for you to do the evaluation for this session, and you can give us a feedback or several feedbacks that what can we do better to improve this thing and what do you want to learn for the future webinar. If we can have the QR code up here, that would be great. And then and also like as I mentioned, the next session is going to be the CT optimization. I think like correct me if I'm wrong. So CT is like the highest produced radiation dose to the patient. That maybe that's why we need to focus on the CT as the first one. Is that correct, Sam? In your opinion? Right. Yeah. So that's why we need to focus on CT in terms of like how to optimize that thing. And I think it's widely used, widely available in most of the hospital right now. It's maybe like the first, like a physical examination on the patient, that the patient come to the ED, go to the CT first or something before the actual physical examination. So that's why I think like we need to learn on that things and how to optimize those things. So the next session is going to be on July 5th. Same time. So it's going to be about like a 1 and 1:15 minutes, 1 hour to like a 1:15, 1 hour and 15 minutes on those sessions. So please plan to attend that things, and we're gonna have the QR code for you guys to register and also give us a feedback. We really need the feedback to improve this thing. And this video is going to be on the AOSR YouTube channel that you can watch later, and also on the Doctor platform that you can watch later. And if you have any questions or concern, or like when you watch the video and you want a couple things to clarify, please send us an email or put on the chat box or something, and we can answer those things for the next session. Okay. So Dr. John, do you have any like a closing remark or something for us today before we end the session?
Thank you very much, Dr. Brady. It's a revisit and eye-opener again. And I hope everyone enjoying this session as much as I am. And please join us for the future series. Right now we have so many, so make sure that you get all. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sam. You have anything to say? Or yep, okay.
I'm good. Thank you. Always appreciate being invited. It was good to see you both.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. See you next month,
Okay.
July 5th.
I think speaker should be still here. Then we
Okay.
doctor end the live.